Yeah, boy. Okay, good afternoon. It is Monday, July 12th. This is the Administrative Committee meeting of the Moscow City Council. I'm Gina Terusio. To my right is Ann Zabala, and to my left is Sandra Kelly. First item on our agenda today is the approval of the June 14th Administrative Committee meeting minutes.
I move we approve them.
Okay, everybody's nodding. This is good. Okay, our second item is the amendment to City Code to address management reorganization.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Riedner and Ms. Mia.
Thank you. I'll let Mia talk the more technical stuff since she wrote this document. However, what it is implementing is the management reorganization that Council approved by resolution back in 2019 and which has been implemented in the FY20 budget and, of course, the FY21 budget, now in the FY22 budget. At that time, we had talked about there were references in the city code to Public Works Director, Community Development Director, so on and so forth, that those positions, if they were going away, then we needed to rewrite the ordinance so that it was somebody appointed by, and typically that person would be the city supervisor. And all it is if it's something would, for instance, were to be approved by the Public Works Director, it could be the Deputy City Supervisor, it could be the city engineer, so on and so forth. But as the needs of the city change, that person might change as well. So we can walk through those one by one if you like. I know you've had a chance to read the ordinance. Title 1, Chapter 1, or excuse me, Title 2, Chapter 3 is probably the one that stands out the most, and that is that appointments by the mayor. So we added deputy city supervisors in there. That position did not exist. We had an assistant city supervisor, which was not codified. That was just a just like the Assistant Parks and Rec Director is not codified. That was a position that was created administratively. These are not created administratively. They are created through a change of the ordinance, similar to our Title II department heads, the city supervisor's position, city attorney, so on and so forth. There's a couple reasons for that. One is they are positions that are supervising department heads, so they need to be an appointment rather than just the city supervisor naming the deputy city supervisors, for instance. Also, there is a process by which appointed officers of the city are terminated, and that is, well, in order to get the job first, you need to be appointed by the mayor, and then the council approves that appointment. So there is a process for someone to be appointed, and there is also a process for someone who is going to be terminated from that appointment. So in order to be appointed, the mayor appoints. A majority of the council has to confirm that appointment. In order to terminate, the mayor could terminate with a majority of the council, or the council unanimously could terminate the position. So it speaks more to the overall authority of the position, that it's more broad-reaching than just a manager.
Gary, for a second, when you're talking about the termination, did you mean to leave out the mayor in the second half of that? Like the council can terminate unanimously? Is the mayor not a factor in that?
The appointee is, the council cannot appoint someone without the mayor. The mayor is the only one who has those appointive powers. However, once you are in your position, meaning an appointed officer, you may have a mayor who wants to keep an appointed officer. And
so he isn't at that
the whole council may say, this is a bad deal, this isn't working for us, and mayor, we know you like this person.
But
the city as a body has to be able to act. So that's why it's a unanimous council and the mayor with a majority of the council.
Thank you.
That makes sense.
So what we've done, if you go to page 7 of 43 in the packet, I'm just looking at the bottom down here, where you talk about the office established, section 14-1. That is very similar to the other department head appointments. And if you go down to duties, powers, and responsibilities, there's a couple different ways this could have been done. Mia and I debated about how much specificity do you put in here? Do you just put in here that the deputy city supervisors will be assigned duties and will, duties is assigned essentially. With the division and the groups that we talked about today in the budget meeting was that those groups were set up for a certain purpose. And they may change once in a while, and this gives the flexibility to change them, but it also sets out those duties for each one. And that's essentially so that the purposes of the groups, we kind of get used to those. Again, I'm not saying at all that there will never be a change of responsibilities. For instance, you'll recall that information systems at one time was in recreation, culture, and employee services. It worked better to have that department aligned with administration. So I took that management of that department back. So that's why it's more specific than normally would be. Okay, also, it's a classified position. The reason they have a classified position is there are some cities have contracts for their upper division employees. So you have a contract, there's everything from expectations, setting compensation, termination provisions, and typically a severance package. We have never gone that way. The city has always hired, our department has hired the city supervisor, and essentially that you are subject to the regulations of the personnel policy just like any other employee. So that's what that means. Combination of positions is right out of the city supervisor's title, and that is that if, for instance, say the street stormwater manager, Steve decides to go somewhere else and Tyler has to fill that role. If he has to manage streets and stormwater in addition to his deputy city supervisor responsibilities, he may receive some additional compensation for that, but he's not going to get double the compensation. So it allows that flexibility. Throughout then, again, I'm not going to go through all of it unless you want to, because it spans the entire breadth and width of the code, that just taking those positions that were identified specifically to those positions which no longer exist, and we probably ought to go through that as well. So the positions that no longer exist is the Human Resources Director, the Public Works Director, the Community Development Director, and the Parks and Recreation Director. And you saw today throughout all of the organizational charts. I know you received the communication today about whether there was any confusion about the city's overall organization chart, and there is not. The elected officials are at the top of the food chain. They are responsible for, council's responsible for the policies of the city, the legislative functions, the mayor is responsible for operations and executive functions, and any organizational charts below that usually start, once you get through the overall city org chart, is departmental or group-wide. So that's why in every one we don't have mayor, council, and then down to the manager level.
Yeah.
It just has too many levels.
I do think it could be helpful to include that visually in the top level one.
Sure.
Just because I think, and I don't think we have this issue, but I know that there are sometimes there's the possibility for bumps in the road where we direct you as individuals. That's not helpful. And so like the collective body,
Sure.
I don't know, I think it could be helpful to include.
Okay. And usually we handle, for the public, absolutely. We handle that in orientation, as you recall. We go through that entire, what are the duties of the mayor, what are the duties of the council, and how does staff implement those duties. So, it is an ordinance, so it will have to go on the regular agenda, and both Mia and I are ready to answer any questions if you have
Can I
them.
actually ask Jen a question?
Absolutely.
This is not a hard question at all. And I may have asked it before.
Come on up, Ms. Pipner.
Do not panic. I just know that because you also do HR, you might hear a few more things. How is the staff reacting to this just in general in the city? Have you had anything weird come up? Do they like it?
No, we haven't. And it's been, it was talked about for a very long time before it was proposed, is talked about as we went through the transition. So I think we managed the change fairly well. I think there was a bit of confusion with the HR piece, which we've remedied recently, but again, needed just some time to get through that, and COVID didn't help.
Yeah.
So I think it's gone really well, and I haven't heard anything negative overall.
No, I haven't either. I just,
Yeah.
I want to know, and I guess, do you mind if I ask one more question? So, Mia, maybe this is for you, but what were you looking at legality-wise when putting this together, since it is a big shift in what we've been doing?
Well, in 2019, when City Council passed that resolution approving the reorganization, so really once you gave us that direction and said, work on preparing the ordinance revisions consistent with this, and then as we all know, COVID hit. But one of the benefits that did is it's given us time to have this in place, and it's worked pretty well, and I think that speaks to what Jen is saying, that she hasn't received a lot of negative impact. But going through the Idaho code, especially Title 15, that talks about the authorizations, limitations on municipalities. Everything proposed in here is in line. In the Idaho code, there are specific provisions where certain positions have to be by appointment, and then the cities are authorized to include additional positions by appointment. And the appointment process and the removal process is the same as what is included in the Idaho code. So all of that fits.
Great.
Any other questions?
I don't think so. I think other than just that visual component that I mentioned, I think it looks great.
Yeah.
Okay, regular agenda, sir.
Thank you.
Sure. Our next item is electric scooter. Thank you, Mia and Jen.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Our next item is electric scooter and shared mobility program code amendment and license agreement. Mr. Belknap, what a title at the end of the day.
Too bad we couldn't make a fun acronym for that.
SMPKL. Yeah, it's just not going to work.
So first, I need to apologize. I know it's been a long day.
Not
I
at
have
all.
40 slides here. I'm going to try to work through fairly quickly. 40.
Oh my God, you're serious?
All text. Yes.
All text.
No
That's
pictures.
like 37 too many.
Okay, I'm going to shut that machine off.
Oh my gosh, somebody.
Okay.
Randy.
Okay.
Really, what the hell?
So just a little bit of background. Over the last couple of years, the Transportation Commission and the Pathways Commission have been discussing topics related to e-bikes, and e-scooters kind of came in a little bit after that. But initially, the first discussion was about e-bikes and how do we want to utilize those or allow their use on the city's pathway system. And then it kind of expanded to the scooter. So e-bikes are actually fairly well addressed within state law, but scooters don't fall under any provisions of state law or city code. And we have received inquiries from 2 companies in the last 6 months who desire to potentially start a shared mobility program that is the Birds of the world, and Bird and Lime as a scooter company, so want to deploy the devices in the city. So that kind of expanded the scope of what we were looking at before. Initially, it was starting off with personally owned e-bikes and e-scooters, and now it's kind of shifted to also include shared mobility programs as well. Given the potential increase that both personal ownership and shared mobility programs would bring to the city, the Transportation Commission felt it was necessary to directly address how and where these devices can be utilized within the city. And so this is really what this is intended to address. We spent a fair amount of time reviewing both other jurisdictions' codes, specifically Boise, that has a fairly comprehensive city code section that addresses e-bikes and scooters, and now you'll see e-boards, because you'll see one-wheels and other devices. And also, we reviewed industry best practices in regulating and managing those devices and uses, and also supporting alternate modes of mobility within your community. We worked with both commissions to prepare a draft of city code amendment to address those, which is one of the items here before you. We also then developed, and really the legal department carried the bulk of the weight here on working on developing a license agreement for these shared mobility companies that has
Good.
standards of performance and response and redistribution and safe device operations. And so we have that as well. Currently, we have within one section, and this kind of, we have one section of the city code that addresses the pathway system, what we call the walkways and bike paths. It's Chapter 2 of Title 11, and that's actually what we're looking at amending here. Underneath the current existing code, it adopts essentially a map that's intended to designate areas that are for non-motorized use, and essentially declares it unlawful for any person to operate or permit or to be present a motorized vehicle upon any restricted bike path or pedestrian walkway identified pursuant to that chapter. There are some exemptions that relate to, permits, and a lot of this, I think, kind of probably spawned from the campus walkway system when a number of streets were closed on the campus and became part of the pedestrian walkway system. But there are some exceptions related to, you've got a permit to operate it on that facility, or police emergency response vehicles, or motorized wheelchair. Somebody who, or similar conveyances are exempted from that prohibition. It does provide that there should be posted notice of those restrictions, and then just as penalties as being a misdemeanor if you were to violate the code. This is the most recent map that was adopted, and it's actually dated in 2007. It's kind of interesting because it covers some weird areas that you wouldn't think would be on the map. For example, this is a Sweet Avenue parking lot. So all the sidewalks around it and the center sidewalk through the parking lot is on this. It has the sidewalk on the side of Sweet Avenue as well, on both sides. And those aren't things you would normally expect you would need to post on a map that you can't use a motorized vehicle. Those are sidewalks like any other sidewalk within the community. You would assume that you would have the pathway system, segments up here by Good Sam, and then the Paradise Path here on the Troy Highway and heading out to the Chipman Trail on the west side, and then the pathway system through campus. But it seemed like at some point in time, and it even includes sidewalks heading up Nez Pierce Drive, that somebody got a little bit creative with the crayon and coloring a lot of areas. And then we also have some kind of staircases in a few areas. Again, I don't think it's a high risk of a motorized vehicle utilizing those, but
So this is a red as you can ride, or you can't?
cannot. This would be the bike, paths, pedestrian walkways that this code references and prohibits the use of motorized vehicles. So anyways, that's kind of what exists today that addresses motorized vehicles on pathway system. So we'll kind of walk through the proposed code amendment. And so it does include definitions of an e-bike, e-scooter, and e-board. So those are kind of three of the devices that are defined. It also includes a definition of both station-based and station-less shared mobility programs. There are not a lot of docked systems out there anymore. Those were really focused around bikes, and bikes have become less popular, and scooters and other devices have become more popular. So what you see more often are station-less shared mobility programs. That is a device that can be left anywhere within an area that's allowed to be left. The code would address some general standards to start off with. Really just states that every person that operates one of these devices on a roadway or any other location shall have the same rights and responsibilities applicable to motor vehicle laws where it's not in conflict with Idaho code. Operators of those devices will be expected to operate devices in a safe manner as approved by the manufacturer. There are some exemptions for this section that don't address emergency responders, where there would be exemptions for, let's say, some of the speed limitations or method of operation. We can then move into section 2.4, so riding on the roadways. No person shall operate any of these devices against the flow of traffic. Again, that's just to ensure, unless it's specifically permitted. You can have contraflow bike lanes where it is indicated you're flowing against traffic. So this is just saying you're going to ride with the flow of traffic unless it's specifically marked by official signs or pavement markings that you can ride against traffic. Every person riding with the devices is entitled to use the lane appropriate for their destination, including the right-hand lane. And on any one-way roadways, you could utilize any lane of that roadway. Whenever a bike lane is present, we are encouraging, this would require e-bikes, e-scooters, e-boards to use that bike lane, except when it may be unsafe. So when the lane is insufficient width, or when the condition of the pavement or presence of water or debris, or if they are moving into position to make a turning movement, or when there may be an opening car door or other obstruction that renders it to be unsafe, then they could take the actual travel lane. But this is, again, encouraging them to use the bike lane where it's present.
Does this make cycling less safe? Is there any evidence of that for cyclists who are also using the bike lane and sharing? At this
Not
point?
that I have seen. If everybody's riding in the same direction, it probably shouldn't make it any less safe. You may have instances, I mean, if you have a cyclist that has to overtake another cyclist, you might have to overtake a scooter or another device. Anytime you might have to do that, they potentially could be out in the travel lane, but they need to look and make sure it's clear to do that. But you would have that condition present, I think, with multiple bikes at different speeds. If the operator of the device is delaying vehicles in the same lane, they are required to move as far right as is safe to do so. There is an exemption from that. If you're within 50 feet of an intersection, you are not required to move to the far right of the lane because you may be making that turning movement to the left. So if you're within the distance, you're not supposed to hooky bob or attach yourself to a moving motor vehicle. And again, reckless or inattentive operation. If you operated in a reckless or careless manner, that would be a violation, which shall be a misdemeanor. Riding on sidewalks. Now, under state law, bicycles are allowed to ride on sidewalks, and the city has not done anything to prohibit that. We do
Can
have
we?
a wide range. Cities can.
What do we have to do?
The city would have to pass an ordinance to do so.
How do I start doing that?
Bringing the topic to the Transportation Commission would be the good place to start.
Okay.
There has been a lot of discussion about wide ranges of ages and comfort of riders, especially in the downtown area where you might have families and young children who don't feel comfortable riding on the street.
Sure, but
and
they feel
so-
comfortable enough riding in the traffic of the sidewalk to other people, so I think walking would be great. My
So-
opinion.
So under state law, bicycles are allowed to be operated on sidewalks unless prohibited by
Okay.
local ordinance. So we would treat these devices the same way.
Is there a speed for them?
There's going to be now. There is not currently, but you'll see item B, we
Sorry,
do
I
have
got
a
ahead
speed
of the
limit. No, you're fine. And so essentially it states that they may be operated within a sidewalk and within a crosswalk, except where prohibited. Or when the number of pedestrians using the sidewalk renders riding on the sidewalk unsafe because of the risk of colliding with the pedestrian, in which case the operator will be required to dismount and walk until an area where safe riding may resume. So it does provide a provision that requires a dismount if it is unsafe to continue riding. Again,
Okay, and I don't mean to be a curmudgeon on that.
Yeah.
How do you know?
that would have to be the police officer's judgment at that point in time.
So you can, okay,
Yeah. And then item B states that if you're riding on a sidewalk or within a crosswalk, should not exceed a speed of 10 miles per hour and shall yield the right of way to pedestrians. Item number C, again, it just states that you shall not make sudden movements, leaving the curb or sidewalk and moving into the path of vehicle so as to constitute an immediate hazard. So again, if you're on the sidewalk, stay on the sidewalk, across the crosswalk as a pedestrian, but don't jut out in the street and jump right in front of a vehicle and cause an unsafe condition. On pathways, again, they're all authorized to operate on pathways, so it's unlawful for anybody to present a motorized vehicle. Again, emergency police and fire vehicles are exempt from restrictions in this chapter. E-bikes, e-scooters, and motorized wheelchairs, similar conveyance may be operated by disabled are exempted from that prohibition. So essentially, you can't have a motorized vehicle, but those e-devices are exempted from that. On the pathway, operators of a bicycle, e-bike, and e-scooter shall not exceed a speed of 15 miles per hour unless otherwise posted. And any operator of a bicycle, e-bike, or e-scooter riding upon any non-motorized pathway shall yield the right-of-way to any pedestrian. Again, we also have included the e-boards in this as well. So this is older text from a prior presentation. We had a fair amount of discussion at the Transportation Commission in many areas. They have regulated the devices based on their capability or the wattage. The police department felt it you know, it's kind of like your vehicle. We don't regulate your vehicle based on how fast it can go. We regulate it based on the posted speed limit. And they felt it was, because of the technology changes, as soon as they move to a different wattage and drop out of that definition, then you're left to what are they?
So, again, not meaning to be curmudgeon on this, but how, if you're on the pathway, are you gonna have little radar guns out there by a policeman on a bike
They would.
patrol? Or, I mean,
They would.
and you're also, like, I know that your 10-speed can go pretty fast when you're on the path, right? And so, I mean, I know, gosh, folks going to Pullman often ride about 18 miles an hour. I know that's not our jurisdiction, right? But
18 is about where you top out on a bike.
Yeah.
And 15, 16 is about where any commercial, well,
Sure.
the rideshare company scooters top out as well.
right. Okay. So do you know, are we gonna have extra patrol out? Again,
It's
I'm gonna be
likely
asked all
to
these
be,
things,
it's
too.
likely to be complaint-based. So if there is an individual that is consistently violating, somebody perceives they're consistently violating the speed, the police department would do a patrol there. We did meet with them to talk about, does it make sense to regulate devices by wattage or to
Yeah.
actually by the method of operation that people are using them? And they felt the operation was the appropriate way and that they could manage this system.
I have a
Thank you.
sort of related question, and now seems like a good time to ask it. When I got into Boise, downtown Boise for AIC, I was very clear-headed at midnight, unlike anybody else in the scene. And I had a great viewing of some people on scooters, and I was like, well, yeah, are they subject to DUIs if you're using one intoxicated?
Oh, good question.
It's not considered a motorized vehicle for purposes of the DUI law, so I think they could be cited, you know, in this instance for
Reckless.
reckless, which is a misdemeanor.
Seems like more danger to themselves than anyone else,
Yeah,
but
pretty much.
Oh, no, I
it's
did
very
it by bike.
questionable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And then bicycle, e-bike, e-scooters, again, shall yield the right of way to any pedestrian. So parking, again, bicycle, e-bikes, e-scooters, or e-boards shall not be parked in such a manner as to obstruct or impede the movement of pedestrians, motor vehicles, or other bicycles, e-bikes, e-scooters, or e-boards, or cause any damage to trees, shrubs, or other living plants. So we want to make sure that they are parked appropriately. They're
Where they go.
not necessarily on the tree. And then some provisions about, you know, maybe it's unlawful to tamper, destroy, or mutilate any license received or license issued under the provisions chapter, or unlawful for any person to remove, destroy, mutilate, or alter any bicycle plate, sticker, or marking issued underneath the provisions of this chapter. And then if a device is abandoned, then we have the right to impound. And so that's what this section addresses as well.
Can we look at that for a second again?
Yeah.
I was going to ask, what do we define impounded or abandoned as, but.
That's really, though, kind of a moot point, right? Because they're going to come and get those every night.
They should. And that's why there's provision that if they don't, and again, this has to cover both shared mobility systems as well as individually owned devices, right? So if somebody leaves their bike chained to a tree downtown.
or if you get tired and leave it in the
perpetuity.
ditch and walk away. Because it's 2 in the morning and you just want to go home.
Well,
But the shared mobility companies underneath the license agreement are required to come collect, rebalance, reposition the devices within the community.
I'm missing this. Are we setting it as a time period, or are we just determining, oh, that's been there
I
a
think it's
long time?
pursuant to this section, Idaho
Okay,
Code
gotcha.
55403, which I don't know to heart what the standard is for that. And we can find that out for you. Section 2-10 just is for shared mobility programs. This again just states that you have to get a license from the city to operate a station or station-based or station-less shared mobility program. So currently, it's uncertain if a company came in and just dropped them in and started operating, that we have legal authority to require that a license agreement. So this includes that provision and requires that license to be issued. And again, manufacturers, distributors of e-bikes, scooters shall apply a label that is permanently fixed. Label should contain the classification, top speed, and printed on Arial 9-point font.
If I may, Bill?
Yes, sir.
If we aren't regulating the wattage of the e-bike or whatever, is that section necessary? Is it because we may regulate it in the future?
That section has been removed from the latest draft. I apologize. This is a presentation from Transportation Commission, so we've made some changes to it.
just
Good
old
catch.
language. Yeah.
So we did remove that section. So abandonment, route to impound, And then the shared mobility program was 2-10. So this actually is the end of the enforcement agency. So the chief of police or the chief's designee shall be granted authority to enforce and carry out the provisions of the chapter and penalties. Any person violating any provisions of the chapter unless specific penalty is prescribed shall be guilty of an infraction. And upon conviction thereof, a court of competent jurisdiction shall be punished pursuant to this code and Idaho code. So these last couple slides are, should have been deleted. My apologies. It's from the old presentation. So we were doing fine till then.
Yes.
Okay.
So those last two sections on the code amendment. So that is it for the code amendment. Happy to try to answer any questions the committee may have.
Do businesses, so let's say both wanted to come in tomorrow and operate, they could do that. Would they need to acquire city business licenses, or would they be covered if they were licensed in the state?
So we don't have
We don't do
specific,
that, right?
other than very few types of businesses, we do not license them. We would say they would have to have the license agreement with us for them to operate within the city's public rights of way.
Gotcha. So that would be the barrier to entry.
Correct.
And we're currently working on where they're allowed to take these scooters and,
Yep, and
boards
we'll
and
cover that
whatnot.
here just in a moment underneath the
All right.
license agreement section.
okay,
But before we moved on, I just wanted to see if there's any questions on the city code amendment.
okay.
Answered
We're
mine.
good.
Okay. So what we have, Mia has worked to develop this template license agreement. There are a couple minor revisions she's working on right now, really just related to the abandonment. We had that section in the city code that if a device is abandoned, the city has a right to impound. She wanted to also reinforce that in here, so a couple minor changes. But this covers the bulk of it. I'll run through it fairly quickly because it is fairly long. But generally, the company is obligated to have a local agent to manage repairs and relocation of the devices. So these are just kind of all the provisions that the company is obligated to do underneath the agreement. They have to provide easily visible contact information, including a toll-free phone number and or email address on each device for members of the public to make relocation requests or report an issue with the device. So if somebody wakes up and finds it in their front yard in the morning, we need to have a way for them to contact the company to have somebody come pick it up and relocate that. Company needs to maintain a 24-hour hotline to field those complaints and requests for immediate removal of those devices as well.
Do they do that already generally?
Yeah.
They do, yeah.
And this license agreement is really largely based off the city of Boise's license agreement. So and we've provided them a copy of this. They've not objected to any of the provisions. So these are very common provisions you'll see in these. The company shall provide materials, video signage, and other communication methods to promote safe riding. Oftentimes when you first sign up for the app, you have to watch a tutorial. Kind of tells you how to ride, where to park the vehicle, where to park when you're done. And so they have to provide that information to their riders. The company's fleet shall be maintained and demonstrate minimum utilization rate of 2 rides per day to remain in service. And this is really intended to try to avoid clutter and devices that sit there for days on end that aren't utilized. If they are not being actively utilized, the fleet is probably too large, and we want to minimize and trim that. So they are required to remove a device that fails to meet that utilization, and they are required to provide utilization reports to the city twice a month on the 1st and the 15th, so we can track the utilization of the devices. They need to clean, maintain, repair them, keep them in a safe operating condition. All devices shall be safe for operation and may be inspected by the police department prior to operational deployment. And the company shall remove any device not safe for operation within 24 hours of notice, and that device shall be fully repaired before being returned to service. The company's devices do need to be able to stand upright when parked, so they aren't dependent upon any type of other support structure. And the company shall ensure the devices are parked in a legal manner, in a manner to not obstruct the public right of way. And oftentimes, if you've used some of them before, you have to take a photograph of it when you park, and they don't let you end the trip until you do, so that they can track down to individual customers if they're parking in an appropriate way or not. And the company shall not allow devices to be relocated by remote control and must manage relocation by its local operator and agent. Apparently, City of Boise had learned that potentially some scooter companies are working on developing technology where they could be remotely driven. And so somebody would just log in and drive and reposition the device remotely.
It's putting
That's
itself
probably,
backwards.
we don't want to be the test bed for that, so probably we'll wait a little while for that. So they have to physically come collect and relocate the devices. We are not certifying that our public rights-of-way are appropriate or safe for the use of these devices. And so the company is exercising its own due diligence in reviewing the condition of the city's streets and roadways and public rights-of-way to determine that they're safe for the customer's use of the company's devices. So we want to make that statement.
Some lawyer came up with that.
Yeah.
A company's device shall be available at rates that are clearly and understandably communicated to the customers prior to their use. And then we have two geofenced areas we're going to work on. I've got some maps here I'll show in the next slide. So we have kind of low-speed areas, so that's kind of the downtown area. So they have the ability to geofence it, draw an area in a map, and the software, the devices controls their speed of operation in those areas. And so we have two types of geofenced areas. One is speed limitation, and the other is the end-of-trip prohibition. We don't want them to end it or park the device in a particular location.
Nope.
And so we worked through that with the Transportation Commission as well as the University of Idaho, and we have the blue shaded areas is what we've kind of identified as being the speed limitation. And that's pretty much all of downtown inside the couplet, in between Jackson and Washington, from Lewis up to A. And then we have the red shaded areas, which is a prohibition on the end of trip. This is really Friendship Square here. So for us, the Transportation Commission felt this was really the only critical area where we had such pedestrian activity that we wanted to manage that speed. And a walking speed's 3 to 4 miles an hour, so even at 6 miles an hour, it's 1.5 to 2 times the speed of walking speed, but we're reducing that differential and hopefully reducing that conflict with pedestrians. For the university, it was campus walkway, and then up at the Commons was an area where they didn't want to have the clutter, so they've identified locations there. So we'd go ahead and incorporate these areas within that agreement for both attachments B and C.
I had a question and now it has I'm guessing the answer is yes, but if you're writing it, can you tell how fast you're going? Is there like a little?
Yeah, there's a speedometer on.
Okay,
Yep.
great.
So just a little closer view, but that's the area.
So the Commons basically?
Yep.
That's where you can't park them?
You couldn't end your trip in that location.
Okay.
All devices have to be clearly labeled with a unique identification number. Again, we're going to be licensing a certain number of devices, so we need to be able to track those, which must be legible from a distance of at least 30 feet. Daily rebalancing the fleet. Again, the company shall remove all of its deployed vehicles from the public right-of-way every 24-hour period prior to 6 a.m. to ensure the fleet is properly repositioned and deployed.
So I'm a little confused about this. So where, are they going to put them in the same spot every 24 hours or just move them out of the?
My guess is they're going to go from campus in the day to downtown at night. They're going to move back and forth with the flow, and they're going to want to try to get them well distributed so that they're available in different locations and accessible. I mean, to be able to rely upon this and for them to have utilization, they need to make sure there's probably going to be a certain flow at different times of day that they need to get them repositioned. So they'll probably base that on utilization and where people seem to be ending their trips to make sure, and where they start the trips to make sure that they're well distributed.
Great, thank you.
How many scooters?
With Bird, they're indicating 100. And traditionally, they say about 70% of those are in active operation and 30% are in kind of reserve for when devices go down. So we may be in that 70 to 80 scooters out at any given time. The company has to maintain an electronic payment system that is compliant with industry data security standards. Company shall provide a copy of its privacy policy to their customers as well. They shall inform customers of local traffic laws, educate customers on how to safely ride, shall have each rider agree to a waiver of liability, including indemnifying the city prior to its use, shall allow customers without a smartphone to use the shared mobility devices. So they have some phone numbers you can call in to actually unlock a device if you don't have a smartphone, to make sure that there's equal access to everybody. They also have to provide a method of payment without a credit card for those individuals who may not have one as well. So it's again about equity and access to the system. And then they have a number of data reporting requirements upon request. So the company shall provide city data in real time regarding the number of customers and trips. Company shall provide device availability data for oversight of parking compliance and device distribution. And company shall provide detailed report of all devices, including their ID number, trip record number, trip duration, distance, date, start time, start location, and location. So this is all information that they can provide to us upon request, so we can monitor how the system is operating. They also are required to provide maintenance activity reports within 48 hours of request of the city. And the company shall submit upon request city a record of all reported collisions upon company's devices. So we can understand where we're seeing potential safety concerns and what actions they're taking and maintenance or they're doing on a device to avoid such future incidents. They have to obtain our written approval before deploying any additional devices. So we have an application form. They'll be applying for a certain number of devices. They cannot employ any others without modifying or getting approval by the city. And the city and the company would not be allowed to deploy any additional devices if they've had devices impounded that they have not retrieved. Consideration, so we've come up with a proposed fee. There would be annual fees of $2,500 for the application plus $100 per device. So if the company is looking to deploy 100 scooters, that'd be $12,500 they'd pay on an annual basis. There's an additional security deposit of $20 per device that they'd pay as well. And that's it for the license agreement.
I have a couple questions on this. What happens if we find out that the majority of our bikes and scooters are really going like from campus to downtown, and if they're all around, I mean, maybe we have big times when they do this, like 6 o'clock, 10 o'clock, midnight.
Mm-hmm.
What if it's really way too congested with all of these things? We're like, you know what, this isn't good for our city. We don't want these anymore. What do we do?
What me and I talked about a little bit before the meeting was we would like to modify the term. So the term of this includes, I think, 2 additional 1-year renewals. We'd like to do this as a 1-year term.
Yeah.
I think especially given this is the first time we've had these in our community, we'd like this to be just a year program. And we will see how it goes. And if we have issues and challenges we don't think there are solutions to, that we choose not to renew this in the future.
Mm-hmm. And so if we, I remember watching Spokane, they went through some of this and they ended up really not enjoying their program and had a really hard time doing away with it. So I just want to make sure we had things in place to do that.
Yep.
And then, what about, well, no, I don't have that form very well yet, never mind.
Is the cost not made explicit in the licensing agreement because it could change? And this gives us
Yes.
flexibility there?
So we anticipate that the actual fee would be included in the fee resolution. So we've included this for the upcoming fee resolution. And that could be modified and would likely be modified on an annual basis.
And so what's the total again going to be on that first year?
So $12,500 for the annual license fee plus the $20 per device deposit.
Thank you.
And a couple of years back, we put aside like 20,000 or something. We were going to
Ride share.
share,
For the-
and that's
the
a different
gotcha-
game now. We don't have that anymore.
So that was the bicycle shared mobility program that we actually were going to be paying for them to bring into the community. And so that was the program. It was a little over, I think it was maybe 24,000 between
The
the,
university we were partnering with the
Right,
university.
right.
and the university did pay their deposit. Then the company was bought out by another company, bought out by another company, and I think they've lost their deposit. We never paid it. We were waiting for the devices to be delivered. And so, but in this instance, they will be paying us for the right to use the public right of way.
I like that better.
Are there any, sorry, go ahead.
No, feel free.
Are there any opportunities for businesses to have incentives to put up maybe more bike stands? I don't know if you have e-scooter stands or board stands at this point, but I mean, I can really see a lot of folks wanting to take them downtown. That just seems natural, right? But if they're not allowed just to like lean them up against a tree and you can't block right-of-ways, which all those things I like a lot. are we doing any incentives for businesses to have additional bike stands, or are the company putting any stands up where people can park?
So these are self-supporting. So they don't need
Right,
a,
but even on the sidewalk, like if you're going to Casa Lopez and you're riding your e-bike, where do you go? Right, if they're all lined up, standing up with a kickstand, that seems to take up a lot more room
Yeah.
than when you have a bike stand. I mean, so I'm just wondering how to lack clutter on our sidewalks.
so if it's an e-bike, bikes generally do need a bike rack typically. For the scooters themselves, they'll typically, I'm guessing they're going to end up in what we call the furnishing zone between the trees out on the curb line. That's where we're going to
That makes
encourage
sense.
that they be parked, because otherwise they'd be obstructing the pedestrian walkway. As we go through the downtown streetscape design effort, we will be looking at how can we, and assessing utilization, different locations, and trying to see how we can add additional bike parking downtown.
Great.
There certainly are always locations where it's in high demand, other areas where it's a little bit light. So we may have to just monitor this and see how it goes.
I'm sure there's lots of weird things that are gonna pop up, so.
Guaranteed.
Gary?
So, did Transportation Commission, Bill, talk about, I mean, we have farmers market 26 weeks of the year. Will they not be allowed downtown during farmers market?
The market already prohibits bikes in the market during market hours. So we're assuming the same regulations would apply to scooters.
Okay, so they can't even park there, be on the sidewalks or do anything?
I think they can park on the edge, but they can't bring them into the market.
Okay. My concern, of course, is with 5,000 to 10,000 people milling in around there, even having them in the furniture zone is gonna really have issues.
Do we feel like that needs to be added to this?
I just don't know. Well, I don't know that necessarily needs to be added to this. If the farmer's market needs to change their rules of operation, I know I'm not intimately familiar. I just know they don't allow bicycles into the market.
Yeah.
I guess my concern is if this is a licensing agreement, usually it means that we are offering them to be able to do something in return for them paying us. So should there be something in there that says that the city can designate special events, art walk, things like that, where we don't want them in the downtown area with enough notice, can we prohibit them from being there for the duration of that event? That's, in a
know.
licensing agreement, I think it'd be a little easier.
We could check with the company, see if they can do like temporary geofencing.
Okay.
What they, and they probably have, we'll have to check, see what their ability of prohibiting operation at all. So they got speed limits, and they can set up an area where you cannot end your trip. I don't know if they can set up an area where you can't ride it at all.
Okay.
Where essentially the device dies when you hit
Well,
the counter.
even if it isn't geofenced, even if it's, we call their number, their hotline, and say, okay, we got Art Walk on Thursday night, we don't want any of the scooters downtown. I'm just wondering if there is a provision we could put in the licensing agreement that would allow us to do that.
Yeah, just technically, how would you prohibit a rider from starting someplace else and going down into
Yeah,
it?
I get it.
That would be they could, unless we asked them to collect all devices off the street
Yeah.
during the duration of the event. I think we'd have to see, can they geofence kind of spontaneously on events, and can we prohibit
Or-
operations?
When they do their Friday night roundup of all of their bikes, they just don't put them out Saturday morning until a certain time that farmer's market is over.
But the question is, do you not want to provide the opportunity for students to go to the market in a way?
Yeah,
I
it's a
mean,
good
if they
point.
can't operate it, I mean, their speed limit is so pretty low. If the market rules are you can't bring a bike in,
Yeah,
then they'll park the scooters like they park bikes on the edge of the market.
yeah. I do think we need to be explicit about some of those set.
Yeah. My fear is just that you've got all those people, don't want them tripping over parked scooters. So it might be enough just to post that no e-scooters or something.
Or we
during
could
the
get a
market.
designated area, like in the behind parking lot on Jackson, maybe. Be like, here's where you can park, like you do motorcycle parking or whatever. For farmer's market, we have
Sure,
these three
sure.
spaces where you can park your e-scooters and e-bikes.
Not a bad idea.
Yep.
Anyway, something to think
And
about.
we can talk
Yeah.
with Amanda and find out, how do they think would be the best way to manage that?
Well, I say that, just judging from our discussion here, shall we Well, it's an ordinance, right? It's got to go on regular.
So, yeah, the code amendment is an ordinance. The license agreement was really just a template to share what components it contains. This is not something we necessarily have to approve now. What we would do is, if a company applies, then we would bring it forward to council
Okay.
with the company, with the number of devices we're proposing, and the council would approve that license agreement. We just want to make sure you saw the complete picture of, here's the change we're making to city code, and here's what we're proposing to have in the license agreement. So if there are things that we need to address in here, like those special events, we can incorporate that, and then when a company does make the application, the council would see the complete license agreement.
Okay.
What happens if, maybe no one shows interest in this for like 8 months? And maybe by that time, I've had a great conversation with the transportation department and we're able to put regulations about not riding on sidewalks on. Then do you have to when they come back, then you have to say, we do have a couple things that changed in our code, for instance. Is that how that would work?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we'd let them know that there's been a code amendment, and then that would be incorporated in the license agreement.
Cool.
Okay, so the ordinance on regular,
Yes, ma'am.
okay? And then we'll wait to see the license agreement when somebody steps up.
Yes.
All right.
Do you think they'll step up soon? Do you get a feel for that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
I thought so too,
I get
but,
emails weekly.
Yeah.
Just
I'm sure, yeah.
Only one company appears to be continuing interest. So Bird is the one that is emailing on a weekly basis, has an interest.
Where are they out of? Do you know?
I
I'm just curious.
honestly don't know.
It's
Off the
okay.
top of my head. They're in a lot of different markets, but I don't know
Yeah.
where their corporate
bases.
headquarters are. But they're the one company that seems to have an interest. They were hoping to launch in June.
Yeah.
We told them we had some details we need to work through before we're willing to be in a position to do that. So I would expect we'd probably see a request or an application as soon as the council approves the ordinance.
I am interested about the farmer's market thing now, because I do think that could be a
Yeah.
problem. I guess we didn't officially adjourn, sorry.
Yes, we're done.
Word, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. I say we adjourn.
Thanks, Bill.
And she gets up